Today we take you inside for a rare and exclusive interview with the man who heads the spy agency, Director John Brennan. Director, we're here in the CIA's private museum. Tell us about this model next to us.
Well, first of all, welcome, Chris, to our museum that we're quite proud of. And this is the model of the compound in Abbottabad that Osama bin Laden was hiding for a number of years. And that was the site of the takedown of bin Laden. But despite the detail that you see on the outside, there's still a lot that we didn't know at the time as far as the inside of the building and what bin Laden and his cohorts might have planned in terms of blowing up the building and confronting any type of force that would come in.
Let's talk about a current threat, Iran. What if the talks fall apart and there is no deal? What's your best intelligence? Will Iran race to develop a nuclear weapon, or are they more likely to go back to where they were before the talks, just a couple of months short of breakout?
The nuclear program is one issue that we're hoping to be able to halt. But also we see that Iran is still a state sponsor of terrorism. And so what we have to do, whether there's a deal or not, is to continue to keep pressure on Iran and to make sure that it is not able to continue to destabilize a number of the countries in the region.
I want to get into that in a moment, but on the deal, what's your guess what happens if there is no deal? Do they break out, or do they stay just short of that?
I think they realize that there's going to be tremendous costs and consequences and implications if they were to decide to go for a breakout. There are a number of things that the United States has available to it to prevent Iran from getting a bomb. President Obama has made it very clear that we are going to prevent Iran from having that type of nuclear weapon that they were going on the track to obtain. So if they decide to go down that route, they know that they will do so at their peril.
On the other hand, if there is a deal, the big question is, can we verify that Iran is living up to that deal? Here's what Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told Congress.
Iran not only defies inspectors, it also plays a pretty good game of hide and cheat with them.
Question, how confident are you that between the new inspections regime under the agreement and your intelligence in the area, that you would be able to ensure that Iran was not secretly building a nuclear weapon?
It's not a question of trusting the Iranians on this. And I know that Secretary Kerry and President Obama are comfortable with what it is that we are insisting on as far as that verification regime.
But frankly, our track record when it comes to Iran and its nuclear program is not good. Iranian opposition groups in 2002 were the ones that revealed that the regime had secret facilities at Natanz and Iraq. One of your predecessors, Michael Hayden, says that they had done a lot of work at Fordo before we knew about it. Fact is, they've fooled us repeatedly, the Iranians.
And I think we've gone to school on some of those developments over the last decade or so that we can now have a better plan and opportunity to verify some of the things that they are saying that they're going to do and not do.
Are you aware of an underground site near Tehran called Lavazan 3?
I know that there are a lot of reports. I'm not going to get into what it is that we know about the Iranian nuclear program, but I am confident that our intelligence capabilities are sufficiently robust that we have a good understanding of what the Iranian nuclear program entails.
Well, the reason I ask is Iranian opposition groups say that there is a secret nuclear facility there that we haven't known about.
I think we have confidence that we're aware of the facilities that Iran has right now. And there's going to be a lot of speculation and rumors about other facilities. But again, I'm confident that right now we have a good appreciation of what the Iranian nuclear program consists of.
What is the danger of a nuclear arms race across the Middle East? Top Saudi officials, including former Intel chief Prince Turki Al-Faisal, say if there's a deal, that the Sunni nations are going to match whatever it is we allow the Iranians to do. Doesn't that just lead to an arms race?
We've talked with our Gulf partners. We're trying to stay very close in touch with them. And I believe that they do have confidence that the United States is going to be sort of the security guarantor in that region to prevent this type of escalation that's going to include nuclear weapons.
But when you have top Saudi officials saying they are going to match the nuclear infrastructure that we allow Iran to have, doesn't that create an arms race?
We continue to have this close dialogue with them about what it is that we are insisting upon from the Iranians and the verification system there. So I'm confident that the Saudis are going to continue to be a very responsible partner and player in the region.
Which is a greater threat to the U.S., Iran or ISIS?
I think they're both threats.
The reason I ask is Iran's reach, I don't have to tell you, is spreading into Iraq, into Syria, into Lebanon, now into Yemen. General Qasem Soleimani is the head of the Quds Force from Iran, is leading the offensive into Crete. Here is what you said recently.
There's an alignment of some interest between ourselves and Iran, clearly, in terms of what ISIL has done there.
Do you really think that the U.S. and Iran share interests?
I think what Daesh ISIL has been doing in the region is something that is counter to U.S. interests as well as counter to Iranian interests. And the Iranians are now engaged with their Iraqi partners to try to push back these forces of terrorism inside of Iraq. So Iran does have an interest in preventing further Daesh ISIL terrorist attacks. At the same time, I think they need to be responsible as far as what they're doing inside Iraq and not further inflaming that situation.
But your immediate predecessor in this job, General David Petraeus, said this week Iran is not an ally, it's part of the problem, not part of the solution. And Benjamin Netanyahu, when he spoke to Congress, said, the enemy of your enemy is not your friend, he's your enemy.
Well, I wouldn't say that Iran is an ally right now. What I'm saying is that the Iranians are pursuing their interests inside of Iraq, some of which include efforts against Daesh and preventing that phenomenon from growing.
But the concern is that we're somehow letting Iran back into Iraq and other areas. And I understand that we don't have a veto power, but the concern is that we are letting them play a bigger role.
Well, we're not letting them play that role. I think they're working with the Iraqis to play that role. We're working with the Iraqis as well, and the Iranians are involved. It's a neighboring state. They clearly have interest there. They're pursuing them. Qasem Soleimani, head of the Quds Force, is somebody who has been very aggressive, very active. There are many things that Qasem Soleimani is doing that are further destabilizing the situation there. So I wouldn't consider Iran an ally right now inside of Iraq. What I'm saying is that the forces that Daesh has brought to bear in Iraq have generated an Iranian reaction that they need to make sure that they're not pursuing a very parochial and separate agenda from what the Iraqi nation and people need.
General Lloyd Austin, the head of U.S. Central Command, told Congress recently that ISIS is losing. But ISIS is still dug into Iraq and Syria. They now have affiliates across North Africa. They were possibly responsible for these terrible attacks this week in Tunisia and Yemen. Director, can we really say ISIS is losing?
Clearly, ISIS's momentum inside of Iraq and Syria has been blunted, and it has been stopped. So they are not on the march as they were several months ago. And so our working with the Iraqis, and the Iraqis now trying to push back against it, it is having some great, I think, progress. At the same time, this phenomenon of Daesh throughout the entire region is something that we need to work with our partners. We see what's happening in other countries and these franchises that are growing up in Libya and other areas. They've claimed responsibility for attacks in Tunisia and Yemen. This is something that clearly is not just restricted to Iraq and Syria, so we cannot relent. We have to continue working with our partners in the region.
Here is what you said in 2012.
If the decade before 9/11 was the time of Al-Qaeda's rise, and the decade after 9/11 was the time of its decline, then I believe this decade will be the one that sees its demise.
Director Brennan, weren't you just flat wrong about that?
No. And when we look at Al-Qaeda, and we look what has happened to Al-Qaeda, particularly the core of Al-Qaeda that was in the area of Afghanistan and Pakistan, they have taken some really big hits.
But respectfully, sir, when you were saying this is the decade of Al-Qaeda's demise, I don't think most people thought you meant, well, yes, but there'll be an offshoot called ISIS, which spreads across the Middle East.
This phenomenon that Daesh represents right now is a new one. It is one that has grown up in the past 2 years.
But it's an offshoot of Al-Qaeda.
So we've done a lot against Al-Qaeda. We've been able to push them back. We've been able to prevent their attacks. But there are these offshoots, as you say. This is a phenomenon that we're going to have to deal with. And I do think over the next decade, this is going to be a long, hard fight.
I guess what I'm asking is, didn't you give the American people, and the President give the American people, a false sense of confidence back in 2012 about our fight against Islamic terrorists at a time, perhaps not so coincidentally, when the president was running for re-election.
What we said was Al-Qaeda was on the run. We said that Al-Qaeda was really bloodied, and it was not the same organization that it was at 9/11 as well as in the years after that. There was no sense that I think either I or the president or others gave to the American people that terrorism was going away. But we've made great progress against a lot of these groups that had plans in place to carry out attacks.
You talked recently of the ideology, your word, that fuels ISIS. What is that ideology?
It is a very twisted, perverted interpretation of a religion that they purport to represent, but in no way do they represent. It's an ideology of violence. That's what it is. It is not a religious ideology.
Well, Islam is certainly a part of it, isn't it?
They purport to be Muslims, but as I said, the overwhelming majority of Muslims throughout the world roundly denounce and condemn what they're doing. And that's why we should not give them any type of religious legitimacy.
This gets to your refusal and the president's refusal to talk about Islamic extremism. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, says you can't defeat an enemy unless you define it. And Egyptian President Al-Sisi called for a religious revolution recently.
The Muslims have to stand up and correct this misinterpretation and deformed picture of what Islam is.
If ISIS is selling its ideology, its brand, twisted brand of Islam to followers and pulling in recruits, don't you have to confront that?
And we are confronting it.
So why not say this is a perverted form of Islam and here's what we're doing to stop it, and this is why they're wrong about Islam, instead of ignoring that?
No, I think that's exactly what we've said. It is a corruption of the Islamic faith. It is a distortion of it. It does not represent the Muslim community or Islam.
Are you prepared to say they're Islamic extremists?
I'm prepared to say that they're extremists, they're violent terrorists who misrepresent what the Islamic religion is about. Yes, absolutely.
What is your read on Russian President Putin? What are his strategic ambitions?
I think President Putin has a view of what sort of Russia nationalism is, that unfortunately I think he has put some of the personal interests of himself and some of the senior members of the Russian government ahead of the best interests of the Russian people.
Haven't we misread Putin throughout the Ukraine crisis? President Obama kept talking about giving Putin off-ramps, but in a movie on the first anniversary of the invasion, Putin said that he always saw Crimea as part of Russia and that he was even willing to put nuclear forces on alert. He never had any intention of backing down.
I think Mr. Putin has demonstrated that he's going to continue to push as far as what his objectives are inside of Ukraine. And I think it is...
So wasn't it naive to even talk about off-ramps?
No, I think what Mr. Putin himself needs to do is to understand how he can extract himself from this situation, because it is coming at the cost of the Russian economy and Russian people being hurt.
But he's happy with the situation.
I don't believe he's happy with the situation.
As director of the CIA, do you see any indications that Vladimir Putin wants out of Ukraine?
I see that what we need to do is to continue to put pressure on Mr. Putin so that the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government can have a future that is going to be peaceful, safe, and secure.
But do you see any sign he's looking for an off-ramp?
I think that there are signs that the discomfort that is associated with this is becoming more uncomfortable.
President Obama says the intelligence community underestimated ISIS's spread during the early part of 2014. Other officials say that you made the same mistake when it came to the spread of the Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen, and the general belief was, before he invaded, that Putin wasn't going to go into Ukraine. Why do those misjudgments happen?
Our ability to evaluate some of these things is limited if we don't have the presence, if we don't have the insights, capabilities. But I think we've done a very good job over the course of time identifying some of these new waves that have come through. But intelligence is not a perfect science. It is one that is based on the intelligence information that we get, the insights, the assessments. And what we try to do is to give policymakers a sense of these developments as they unfold.
But critics would say are we getting enough? Are we getting our money's worth for the billions we spend on intelligence? Aren't those serious mistakes?
No, the world is a complicated place. There are a number of developments that are going on right now in countries that unfold with, I think, great speed, as well as a result of some of the actions that individual political leaders take. And unfortunately, the challenges that government face in a number of these countries are significant.
Speaking of misjudgments, a special national intelligence estimate concluded that the pullout by President Obama of all of our troops from Iraq in December of 2011 helped set the stage for the spread of ISIS. Wasn't the pullout a mistake?
I think the fault really lies with a number of the Iraqis who wasted and squandered the opportunity they had after the government was reconstituted, not to put at rest some of these sectarian tensions and not to be more inclusive as far as bringing the Sunni community in.
But what about this special national intelligence estimate that the pullout of U.S. troops contributed?
Clearly, U.S. military forces provide a tremendous capability to our partners, whether it be in Iraq or other countries. But it really is up to these countries' military, security, and intelligence forces to step up.
Last year, U.S. drone attacks killed at least 138 Al-Qaeda operatives. Isn't part of the problem that we now have a policy where we basically kill these terrorists instead of capturing them, and so we lose the intelligence that they could provide?
I think we have said over and over that if we have the opportunity to capture terrorists, particularly working with a lot of our partners overseas, we will do that. And there have been countless terrorists who have been captured, who have been arrested, detained, who have been debriefed, and are providing intelligence insights into those terrorist organizations.
Experts tell me that when other countries catch these guys, they slit their throats. We don't get any intelligence.
Well, I think those experts are wrong, because we are working with our partners and we're making sure that they do not do things like that. And if we find that there are indications that they're doing it, we take action against them. You
were one of the key players in the takedown of Osama bin Laden, and from this compound here, Navy SEALs were able to recover an estimated 1.5 million documents. Why have only 25 been released to the public?
There is a process underway for the release of those documents. There's also been
It's been almost 3 years.
Yes, and there's also quite a bit of exploitation of information that was obtained in that raid that has assisted greatly our efforts against the terrorists that are out there. We'll continue to do that and exploit that.
But I guess the question is, if you have scrubbed them so thoroughly, and if it's now 4 years later, can't more than 25 be released to the American people?
Sometimes these things take time, and we need to make sure that the resources are dedicated to that effort as well as dedicated to keeping the American people safe.
There are reports that one of the reasons these documents aren't being released is because a number of them show that Al-Qaeda was not in decline, was not on the run as it was being portrayed in 2012, but in fact was a very active operation.
That's hogwash. If anybody believes that we're withholding documents because we believe that it would be embarrassing, that is just absolutely wrong.
You recently created a new division here in the CIA, the Directorate of Digital Innovation. Has cyber become the new front line in the contest between nations and terrorist groups?
CIA has an obligation to make sure we're able to work in all the various domains, the physical domain, maritime, aviation, but the digital domain is continuing to grow and evolve. That digital domain is going to be used by terrorist groups and others, proliferators, to be able to communicate, to be able to incite, encourage, use propaganda and communicate. And so CIA, as well as our other intelligence agencies, really need to master that domain as a way to protect the American people.
Speaking of mastering that domain, was the U.S. behind the massive internet outage in North Korea last December after the hacking of Sony?
The North Korean system is fraught with a number of sort of challenges because it is a country that unfortunately has put its pursuit of military capabilities in front of what the best interests are of the people. And so there is an infrastructure there that is rickety. There are challenges that they face on the technical front. So there are a lot of reasons why the North Korean people and the internet system out there has problems.
Did the U.S. give a little shake to the rickety North Korean system?
I'm not going to address anything that we may have done in that instance, and I'm not acknowledging anything at all here. What I'm saying is that
you're
the
not
North
denying
Koreans,
it either.
You can raise any question about what might have happened worldwide, and I'm not neither going to confirm nor deny it.
We began, you and I, talking about this interview last summer at a time when the Senate Intelligence Agency was investigating the enhanced interrogations that were carried out after 9/11. And one of the key issues was whether or not the agency exaggerated the effectiveness of EITs. Did enhanced interrogation play a role in our being able to track down Osama bin Laden?
I cannot determine cause and effect. That it was only for the use of those EITs that those individuals provided information. But the takedown of bin Laden at that compound was the result of tedious work that was done by counterterrorism experts that were able to tap into the information that was provided by individuals who were in detention and that CIA debriefed.
How badly did the criticism coming 12 years after 9/11 of what this agency did, a very different time, a very different place, how badly did that damage the morale of this agency?
It was demoralizing to a number of people, particularly those who were involved in the program, who really felt as though there was an effort on the part of some individuals involved in that investigation, that report, that were intentionally trying to, I think, just emphasize and overemphasize the mistakes that were made and did not put it into the proper context. Yes, mistakes were made, but the overwhelming activities that were a part of that program were ones that I think the American people would feel proud that the agency was able to fulfill its responsibilities.
Finally, from your 27 years at this agency, the last 2 as director of the CIA, what do you think the public needs to know about the Central Intelligence Agency?
The successes and accomplishments that we have, the overwhelming majority of them will not ever find expression in newspaper and media. They do it silently. They do it not for accolades or parades. They do it because they are true American patriots. So the American people should feel good about what CIA is doing. And yes, we've made mistakes, and sometimes they're the ones that get the spotlight and the headlines, but they are a very, very small portion of what this agency does, and I couldn't be prouder to be here.
Director Brennan, first of all, thank you for inviting us here to headquarters. Thank you for talking with us, and thank you for your years of service to the country, sir.
Thank you, Chris.